The next theory of self-development that we'll take a closer look at is Mead's taking the role of the other. So according to the theory of taking the role of the other, in order to develop a sense of oneself, an individual must be able to put themselves in another person's shoes and to understand how someone else feels and thinks to anticipate how that person will act. So this is similar to Cooley's theory of the looking glass self, but the looking glass self is a lot more about kind of looking in the mirror and seeing and anticipating how other people are seeing yourself and developing your own self-concept based off of these either conscious or subconscious evaluations. Taking the role of the other is really more specifically focusing on how we are anticipating other people will act by mirroring their behaviors, kind of, and then developing our sense of self through these stages of different interactions. So according to Mead, we begin this process of taking the role of other, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, first by taking the role of people that he refers to as significant others. Now, when he's talking about significant others, he's not like referring to spouses or, boyfriends or girlfriends, etc. Significant others are people who significantly influence our lives, right? And in these early stages of taking the role of the other, significant others typically are people like parents, siblings, perhaps, elementary school teachers, grandparents, etc. So individuals who you spend a significant amount of time with when you're particularly a very young child or even a toddler, and the people that you interact with most frequently in those early stages of your life. As our sense of self develops, we begin to internalize the expectations of more people. So eventually, we develop the ability to anticipate the norms and expectations of people in general, rather than specifically only significant others. And this is a concept that Mead refers to as the generalized other. Okay? So when we're very, very young, right, imagine you're 2 or 3 years old, right, you're probably not really able to anticipate or cognitively evaluate how every single person is viewing you when you're walking through a mall, right? You're not concerned about what other people are thinking about your appearance or what you're wearing or how tall you are or what your weight is, etc., right? When you're that young, you're really not caring about any of that stuff because you haven't been socialized to take on the role of multiple people at that point. The only person when you're 2 or 3 years old that you probably care about what they think of you are your parents, right? You know that if you do something bad, your parent is going to scold you. You anticipate that reaction because of the way you've been interacted with that significant other in your life. We don't learn to take on this role of the generalized other or to anticipate how large numbers of people are going to react to the way that we behave until we get further along in our self-development. So Mead breaks down this theory of taking the role of the other into several stages. And the first of these stages is the imitation stage. So basically, this is the first stage of social interaction that we have as human beings, and it's basically just us mimicking the behavior that we see in significant others. So for example, when you're under the age of 3 years old, typically, is when most of the imitation stage takes place. You have no sense of self at this point, right? You don't have a self-concept, you don't have a self-identity, you don't understand what it means to belong to certain statuses in society. You don't have any understanding of the symbols or the language of communication that we have, right? You just are mimicking behaviors you hear, right? So I say under the age of 3, but probably more especially, like I'd say under the age of about, 18 to 12 months. So a great example of this is a baby that's saying, mama, right? If you know someone that has a young baby, right? Like we're talking like I said, maybe a year, less than 2 years old. And the only thing that baby hears every day is its parent hovering over its face going, say mama, say mama. Eventually, that baby is going to say mama. Does that baby know what mama means? No, that baby does not understand that mama is the symbol, a language symbol used to represent the mother of a child. The baby is just saying mama because it's mimicking or imitating this behavior, this interaction, this form of communication that it's heard thousands of times up to that point, right? So this is the first stage in our sense of self-development, is this imitation stage. So we start mimicking behaviors we see when we're itty-bitty babies. We have no understanding about what these mimicking behaviors that we're doing mean. We don't understand this context of being able to communicate with other people yet. We're literally just mocking or mimicking the behaviors that we're seeing in others. The next stage in self-development is the play stage, according to Mead. So in this stage, we start pretending to take the role of a significant other, and we start understanding and using the language and symbols appropriately, right, in the actual context. So this typically happens in children between the ages of 3 to 6, right? So a good example of this is that maybe when you're 3 or 4 years old, you tied a towel or a bed sheet around your neck, and you jumped off your couch and acted like you were flying and said, "I'm Superwoman," or "I'm Superman," right? Or maybe you started dressing up in your parents' clothing, right? Putting on your mom's high heels or wrapping your dad's necktie around your neck and walking around and pretending to be your mom or your dad, right? So at this stage, you're really just playing. You're taking the role of a significant other, right? But you don't necessarily think that you are that person. You don't really understand the roles or the expectations of that particular person. You're still just kind of imitating the behaviors that you've seen these individuals engage in before and trying to appear like them, perhaps, in certain contexts. And you're using language and symbols that you've learned through your interactions to express this portrayal of yourself, pretending to be a superhero or pretending to be your mom or your dad. But you don't really understand how that's not really significantly contributing to who you are as an individual yet. You're just learning how to take the role of other people, right? To play in that imitation role of other individuals at a higher level than just the baby saying mama that has absolutely no idea what it's doing. At this play stage, you start to kind of understand what it means to imitate other people or how to take the roles of other people, you know? That's what this is getting at. So the third stage in Mead's theory of taking the role of the other is the game stage. So in the game stage, individuals will start engaging in organized play, in which the self must be able to take the role of multiple people at once. So the individual will start to internalize society, start to understand these larger pressures of society, and starts identifying their unique role or roles within a particular group culture. Okay. This typically starts happening around the ages of 6, 7, 8 years old, and a great example of this is when a kid starts playing baseball or t-ball for the first time, right? So in order to play t-ball or in order to play baseball, a kid needs to not only understand what's expected of that individual in their role as a baseball player, they also need to be able to understand and anticipate how all of the other players on their team are going to react for when, example, a player on the opposing team hits the ball, right? And a great example, I mean, it's always fun you can see when the play stage kind of evolves into the game stage, using this example of baseball. I think watching like 4 or 5-year-olds play t-ball, nobody really is at the game stage yet, right? As soon as one kid hits the ball off that tee, all 9 kids in the outfield just flock towards the ball, right? They just will run straight towards wherever the ball was hit. Of course, this is not how you accurately play the game of baseball, right? Only the person that the ball is hit towards should be moving towards the ball. You know, the first baseman should stay on first base so they can potentially throw the ball there to get the person out, you know? The catcher should be staying behind home plate in case there's someone off third base that's running in trying to score a run. The outfielders should not be charging the pitcher's mound if the kid hit the ball there because their role is to stay out in the outfield, right? But when kids are really young, like I said, 3, 4, 5 years old, maybe start playing t-ball for the first time, they don't have the ability to enter into this game stage yet. They're not able to anticipate how other people should react. Everyone is still just kind of imitating what they've seen other people do. They know that when you hit the ball, you're supposed to run to it. That's what they understand because they haven't been able to develop this full sense of self yet through this game stage, all right? So as you start getting older though, right, maybe 6 or 7 years old, kids start to understand, all right, in baseball, I should only charge the ball if it's hit in my general direction. Otherwise, I should stay in my designated area because that's my role in this game context. So you start being able to develop a sense of understanding the roles of multiple people in a specific context. And the fourth and final stage of taking the role of the other is the reference group stage. And this is kind of the globalization of the game stage. So in this stage, individuals are now able to be part of multiple groups and internalize multiple societies with varying perspectives. So for instance, you know, I know that the role I occupy as a teacher when I'm engaging with students and interacting with students here at TAMUCC is very different than the role I occupy as a son, right? As a family member. The way I interact with the people in my family and engage in conversations and display myself and present myself is somewhat different than the way I present and display myself in my role of a teacher, right? And that's because I'm part of essentially two very different cultures there. You know, I have the culture of being a member of this academic institution and the culture of being part of the family that I was raised in. So I'm able to kind of take on different roles and know how to interact with other people and anticipate how individuals are going to interact in multiple different contexts, right? And still, I'm able to have this one kind of solid sense of self with all of these different offshoots and different versions of myself that I present in multiple different contexts, right? So that's this idea of the reference group stage, getting able to draw references to different versions of your sense of self in different social contexts, okay? Now, it's important to recognize that not all individuals make it to this final stage of development, as not everybody has the opportunity to be exposed to multiple groups and cultures. I think a great example of this is, for example, if you're like me, I come from a very, very small town. Like, I'm talking population less than 150 people. And a lot of people that live in my small town have lived there their entire lives. You know, they were born there, they were raised there, they worked there their entire lives. Some of them have never even been outside of, North Dakota their entire lives. So that's their only reference group that they have, right? Is this community that they were raised in. And for some people, you will only be exposed to one particular type of culture, one particular society your entire life. And so if you don't get exposed to diversity in forms of different cultures, whether it's different cultures in different regions across the US or different cultures, for example, if your work culture is very, very, very similar to your family or home life culture, then you might not ever extend into this reference group stage because you're never going to be challenged to understand how to present yourself differently in these different social environments. Okay? So not everyone will make it to this reference group stage. Most people will, because most people, especially in today's society, more so than in the past, are forced to kind of become chameleons, if you will, and learn how to adapt and interact with people in different contexts. And all of these different reference groups that we end up having affect how we develop our overall or holistic sense of self and sense of who we are. Another example would be, identifying as a Catholic while simultaneously identifying as part of the LGBT plus community, right? So, for instance, when I go to church, I identify as Catholic, and every Sunday when I attend church, the way that I interact with other people is very different than the way I interact with individuals if I attend an LGBT plus organization or event, right? And all of those interactions I have, despite how different they may be, affect my sense of self and affect how I view myself and the person that I am and the person I will continue to develop into throughout the remainder of my life course. So let's take a second now and reflect on both Cooley's looking glass self and also Mead's taking the role of the other, and let's reflect back on the big three sociological theories that we covered last week. Now, of these big three theories, functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism, which of them do you think most strongly informs or relates to Cooley's looking glass self and Mead's taking the role of the other? So just as a quick refresher, we had functionalism, whose big premise is that society is like a machine made up of many interworking parts, and all of the parts of that machine or all parts of society need to work functionally with one another in order for society to maintain itself in a functionally order. Conflict theory, which focuses on unequal distributions of power amongst different groups in society and argues that groups that have power try and build society in ways that enable them to maintain that power while continually oppressing or disadvantaging those marginalized groups that lack power. And symbolic interactionism, which suggests that virtually every facet of social life is created through the context of social interactions. So the shared meanings and symbols and forms of communication that we have are developed through interactions with one another, and it's through these social interactions that we're able to establish shared cultures in society that enable us to survive and continue to express our shared values and belief systems with future generations. So go ahead and pause the video and think about that for a second and decide which of the big three theories most strongly relates to Cooley and Mead. The answer, symbolic interactionism.